No problem. Okay, welcome. We'll go ahead and get started this morning. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here to the Baker Institute for this morning's talk from Maria van der Hoeven, the Executive Director of the IEA. We'll talk to us a little bit about the golden rules, which is related to the golden age of gas work that was just recently published there. And rather than sort of go into a long introduction and sort of expedite the process so we can get to some questions, because I'm sure a lot of you have some burning issues you would like to have addressed. I'm going to turn the floor over to Thomas Eisenberg. He is the planning manager from the Corporate Strategic Planning Group at ExxonMobil, and he will handle the broader introduction. Thomas?
Thank you. You all ready for fall yet? I stepped out of the hotel this morning and thought a more appropriate attire would have been a golf shirt. Anyway, I'm also the chair of the Industry Advisory Board to the International Energy Agency's group that manages the strategic oil stockpiles for the OECD, which is why I'm standing here. I've been working with the IEA for about 8 years now. And Ms. van der Hoeven became the executive director of the IEA almost exactly 1 year ago, September of last year. Previously, she had served as the Minister of Economic Affairs for the Netherlands for over 3 years, during which time she led energy policy development at the national, regional, and also the global level. As minister, she advanced key aspects of Netherlands' energy policy, including unbundling, infrastructure modernization, developing the Dutch gas hub policy, and accelerating the development and use of renewables. She's been active in European policy development with special focus on market liberalization and energy security. On the world stage, she's contributed to international dialogue both on energy security and on sustainability. She participated in both the Jeddah and London summits on the future of oil prices, and she chaired the 2009 International Energy Agency ministerial meeting. As minister of a country which is Europe's hub for trade in oil, she gained valuable insights into a broad range of energy issues and also assembled an extensive international network. She's a fierce supporter of market principles, promoting transparency and a level playing field. She cut through red tape to accelerate large-scale energy investments, including offshore wind power in the North Sea and the creation of the natural gas hub. She believes in improving energy efficiency, developing and using renewables, and producing energy in the cleanest possible ways. She's here to talk today about IEA's recent work on developing the golden rules for a golden age of gas. So with that, please join me in welcoming Maria.
Well, thank you very much for your introduction and listening to. I said to myself, did I do all this? Well, I think I did. But it took me some years. And, you know, in the Netherlands, when you are a minister, it's an equivalent to what you call a secretary. And when I started as a Minister of Economic Affairs and energy was about 30% of my work. When I the moment I stepped down, well, energy was more than 60% of my work. So it shows how also in the Netherlands things have been developing and how people are very much aware of the fact that you have to invest in the development of energy, because if you're not doing that, you will end up empty-handed, and then we really have a problem. But thank you very much for having me here. And I would like to extend my thanks to the Baker Institute for hosting me. And you know, of course, you know, the US and especially Texas, they have long and illustrious histories of conventional energy production. But recent years have seen North American fossil fuel markets transformed by unconventional extraction, and Canadian oil sands are, for instance, already an established fixture in the North American production. And in the US, we can see light tight oil coming of age. And that is thanks to technologies which some of them were already there, but they have become widespread as a result of another revolution. And the most dramatic change, in my opinion, in the American energy story of the last decades is certainly unconventional gas. In fact, unconventional gas in North America is driving divergence between gas hub prices. And in the US, prices hover at rock bottom prices, around $3 million BTU. In Europe, the impact is indirect via the LNG supply diverted from the United States, and together with increasing gas-to-gas competition, this keeps prices in a middle range of around $9 to $11 per million BTU. But in Asia, there are no proper spot markets, and oil price indexation is dominant, leading to a very high price level. In Japan, as high as $18 per million BTU. And we can expect this to change in Asia. Gas needs efficient, transparent markets to prosper. And given the uncertain prospect of nuclear power in Japan, the political drive to clean up the energy system in China, and the acute energy shortages in India, Asia is intensely looking for LNG supplies. And none of the major supplier options, Australia, East Siberia, or East Africa offshore, is cheap or easy. North America can be a competitive source, but it will take industry, to make that happen. And there is little doubt that if low gas prices continue, they will provide a competitive advantage for the US economy for a long time. And we project North America to become a net exporter. And I'm pleased that the first LNG export project has approved from the Department of Energy, and as far as I know, there is a representative of that company over here present. I would like to congratulate the company with this result. And yes, I'm doing something wrong. Sorry. There we are. But so far, North America has been a relatively isolated story, and that is rapidly changing. Not only is shale gas poised to be exported from North America, but also shale gas technology. And yesterday I visited Eagle Ford, and they told me they had a lot of visitors there who come and have a look at what's going on and learn from them. And I asked them, well, who's the most prominent? China. All the time, China. So now countries around the world are looking to emulate the North American unconventional gas experience. And China and Australia are leading the way, but there is also great interest in parts of Europe, for instance Poland, Latin America and elsewhere. And I would like to highlight the role of China, which is already the largest energy user and pulling ahead every day. China's energy usage is currently dominated by coal, as we know. And coal mining in China produces more energy than the oil production in the Middle East, but also a host of environmental concerns from local pollution to climate change. Natural gas will play a major role in cleaning up the Chinese energy system, just like it did in advanced market economies. So China, in our view, will represent 1/3 of global incremental gas demand, and its growth rate is so high that it is becoming a major producer and major importer concurrently. And yes, China is actively investing in learning advanced shale gas techniques, and with an eye to the carbon footprint of China's astronomical growth rate, we ought to embrace this. And although some people say, well, this growth rate of China is coming down, it's still more than 5-6%, so it's still astronomous. The baseline scenario of our World Energy Outlook, or WEO 2011, sees the share of unconventional gas rise from 13% to 22% of global production, of total production, 2035, or, put it in a different way, 4 times the current US shale gas production. But global gas is also growing in our greenest 450 ppm scenario, showing its role in a transition to a sustainable energy system. And we've seen already in the United States the competitiveness of gas in the power sector, and it has caused carbon emissions to fall rapidly. And it's the shale gas revolution that made this possible. So with such impacts from unconventional gas, it is no surprise that there is such excitement surrounding a similar process to extract light, tight oil. And some even talk of US energy independency. We need to keep our aspirations in check, however. The prospect of energy independence, it's very complex. It depends on the types of crude oil that refiners consume, the composition and level of energy demand, infrastructure constraints, and oil prices. Now, Gulf Coast refineries' capacity to process heavier crudes is increasing, and so it is unlikely, for example, that imports of heavier crude will fall in the future. Overall, markets will remain interdependent, and indeed, diversity is a good thing for energy security. But we cannot ignore that a shift is occurring. Rising oil production from the mid-continent is competing with other marginal oil prospects in North America, and it is expected to ramp up over the medium term. So any sustainable price impact from this renaissance will arguably have implications for producers, both OPEC and non-OPEC. An increasing output is already reducing Gulf Coast refineries' demand for equivalent light sweet crudes from Africa, as shown in the chart on the right. And it's causing steep discounts for Canadian oil benchmark prices compared to WTI. In the longer term, we do project the United States to remain a net importer. But where in 2005 the US imported 3 times as much oil as China, by 2035 it will import only 1/4 as much as China, largely from Canada. And also in the longer term, a substantial price differential between oil and gas should persist in North America, which will create new opportunities for the demand side, for example, for natural gas and transport. And yet, the impact of rapid increase in shale gas and shale oil production also puts constraints on water supplies, human capacity, and drilling infrastructure. And I heard about these constraints that operators face firsthand during a visit to the Eagle Ford Shale yesterday. But while the potential of unconventional gas and light tight oil supplies are both significant and wide-reaching, whether they actually meet that potential is subject to certain and serious uncertainties, and the greatest ones are those surrounding policy. Such uncertainties exist because alongside the potential economic and energy security benefits of unconventional gas and light tight oil production, there are also these legitimate public concerns about its environmental and social impact, and these include the implications for water resource, land use, for disruption to local communities, and they also include the serious potential hazards of water contamination, air pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, last year, we released a special World Energy Outlook report looking at the prospects for the world to enter a golden age of gas, and that was driven partly, mostly, by the revolution in unconventional gas. Whether we get there will be determined by whether we can fully exploit the potential of unconventional gas. And it's called the golden rule scenario. And the risk is a backlash against fracking and unconventional gas in general, leading to a low unconventional case, shown here as well on this slide. Well, in our opinion, the latter would be undesirable. Severely curtailing unconventional gas production would impact the security and the environmental sustainability of energy supply. For instance, the United States would return to the prospect of large-scale energy imports. Chinese import dependency would double, and Europe's dependency would further increase, and those imports would increasingly derive from conventional sources in Russia and the Middle East. And the largest projected unconventional gas producers, it's China, the United States, and Australia, would all be likely to return to coal. And indeed, fully 75% of lost shale gas would be replaced by coal. So while natural gas, and particularly unconventional gas, may not be a long-term panacea, it is hard to dispute its role in the medium term to reduce CO2. But if the social and environmental impacts of production are not addressed properly, there is a very real possibility that public opposition for drilling for shale gas and other types of unconventional gas will halt the unconventional gas revolution, and perhaps also fracking for light tight oil, in its track. And public concerns include, and I mentioned them before, the implications for water resources, land use, disruption to local communities, perceived hazards of water contamination, air pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. And I think we all have to realize that these concerns are legitimate. The risks to companies producing from and prospecting for unconventional assets are real. And I don't think I need to tell you that managing public perceptions is simply good business. And it's not only about communication, it's also about good practice. Now, this process of hydraulic fracturing has been around for years, but the rapid increase in the number of North American wells, and I can tell you, I flew from Sugar Land Airport to Eagle Ford yesterday, so you can see, I went there by airport, I went there by plane, so you can see how it is, how immensely it is, how immensely the number of North American wells are, just in this small part of the United States. So the rapid increase in the number of North American wells, as well as the large number of small companies which drill them, has put a spotlight on those issues I just mentioned. And the issue is therefore one of good governance, good management, and good oversight. Industry and government are both in this. They have to cooperate. Industry must win public confidence by demonstrating exemplary performance, and governments must ensure that appropriate policies and regulatory regimes are in place. Now, in another special report, and that was released in May this year, we've set out some golden rules, and actually they are principles that can help governments, industry, and other stakeholders to address these social and environmental issues, and can be used in the regulatory framework of any country. But it is a delicate balance to strike, because on one hand, I agree, we must avoid excessive regulation which chokes innovation and threatens the viability of the industry. And the energy security benefits of golden age of gas, as well as gas's role as a bridge to a low-carbon economy, both depend on technological development, a healthy competitive market, and the widespread development of unconventional gas, which leads to broadly lower prices and distributed production. So over-regulation would imperil all of these. But on the other hand, we must be sure that safeguards and rules are effective and include proper oversight mechanism. But not only that, politicians and the public, let's not forget about the public, must be reassured of that effectiveness. Otherwise, we are likely to see a backlash against unconventional extraction methods and blanket bans. And in some countries, France, for instance, that has already happened. Now, in order to share best practices on how to strike that balance, we are establishing a high-level platform so that governments can share insights on the policy and regulatory action that can accompany an expansion in unconventional gas production and shale gas in particular. And this platform ultimately will be open to IEA members and non-members alike. And I would like to thank the gas industry for supporting this work with its technical expertise, because, as I mentioned before, industry, governments, and research institutes are in this together. So the revolution of this in an unconventional gas and the rise of light tight oil are already impacting world markets, and they will continue to do so. Cheaper and more secure sources of domestic energy are certainly welcome, but particularly in the case of gas, this revolution is spreading geographically and displacing coal. And that means great benefits for energy security and CO2 emissions on a global scale. But we must work to ensure that these vital resources can be developed without endangering our environment or the welfare of our citizens in the process. And I would like to say it again, the risks are real that public sentiment could derail these technologies. So let us embrace sensible rules to maintain credibility and public confidence. It's not just good PR, or good for the environment, or good for our security. It's all of these. It's good business. So I would like to thank you once again, and thank the Baker Institute once again for hosting us in this beautiful city, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've got a little bit of time to take questions from all of you. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And when I point to you, please state your affiliation and bring the question out.
Al Trona from Asia Pacific Energy. Something that really strikes me in the whole talk is the pivotal role that natural gas liquids, NGLs, has in gas development, as much, perhaps even more so than NGLs. The IEA lumps together ethane, LPG, and condensate, the three main categories. What can be done, or is something already being considered, to make these statistics more useful? Transparency, as you said, is the key point.
Well, we are always very thankful for any suggestions in this field. So if you've got any, please send them to me. Because, you know, we started, we have our data development, we have our data, data collection, data development, and data analysis. What we can see at this moment that from OECD countries, the data that are brought to us, they are quite reliable. But that's not always the case with data coming from other countries. And when we look into what's happening, for instance, in China, India, and Russia, just to mention these three, it's very important to have exact data also from these countries. Well, that's why we are, at this moment, putting quite a lot of emphasis in training and capacity building. It's not just for fun.
You said China and exact data in the same sentence.
Well, that's the point. You know, that's the point. That's the point. That's exactly the point.
You said exact data, so you scared me.
Well, you know, that's why I would like to mention the point. The exact data, well, the data as such are not reliable, are not as is. That's the point. And the same goes for other countries. And that's why I mentioned these three. So one of the things, what we can do to improve this, because that's what's necessary, of course, what we can do is to improve this, is engage to these countries, also to some others, but let's stick to these three for the moment. To make them clear how important it's also for them to have exact data, or data that are reliable. And that's why we are investing quite a lot of human resources and also money from voluntary contributions.
Proving mutual self-interest.
It's proving mutual self-interest, because that's the only way how to engage people and policymakers in China and Russia. Mutual interest. If there's no mutual interest, they will not engage. So that's one of the things we are doing. And if you have other suggestions, be my guest. But I fully agree. Then that's the weak point. That's a point of concern. That's the data, worldwide.
We've struggled with it for many, many decades.
So that's one of the things we are doing. Invest in human capacity, in training and capacity activities. And because of the mutual interest, they come.
Slowly.
Yes.
Yes.
Michelle Foss, University of Texas. We've had some interesting things happen. We've had electric power switching back to coal when natural gas price edged up to $3, which for a lot of us who've been around the business for a long time was kind of an interesting thing to see that kind of psychology out there. So I just wonder, as you all have contemplated this, since I think IEA probably has limited influence on domestic regulators, your point about overregulation being what it is, and considering how that affects the cost structure of natural gas, have you considered that you may get what you want in terms of the golden rules, but you may actually end up with the low unconventional gas case anyway as a result? So what are the implications of that?
Well, I think these are legitimate concerns. Let me put it that way, and that's exactly why I made the comparison between having over-regulation, because that won't work, and having no regulation at all. Over-regulation and no regulation at all are like the ends of the horseshoe, and either of them will make us end up with the low and unconventional gas case. I agree to that. So it's a very delicate balance, and that's exactly the reason why we are working at this moment together with a number of governments, for instance also the government of the United States, to see what can be done about this. But I would like to put something else on the table, and that is the difference between regulating on a federal level and regulation on a state level. And that's what you have to cope with here in the United States as well, because the differences, we've looked into that, the differences between the regulating mechanisms in Texas and in other states, the differences are there. So there's also the question, how are you going to see to it that you have a kind of a template that can be used by all, so that there is competition, you need competition, but if the competition is such that, well, it rules out others, then it's not a real competition. That brings me to the golden rules. Well, one of the golden rules we are emphasizing is drill well. And this is something, well, I can see you laughing. Well, I know. Many people were telling me, drill well. What do you mean by drill well? Of course we are drilling well. And then you ask them, okay, how can you prove to me that you are drilling well? What about geology? What about the aquifers? Do you know where you are drilling? Do you know how deep the layers are? Do you know what the effect of your fracking will be? And if people then tell me, well, you know, we know what we are doing, then they don't know what they are doing. And that's one of the things I would like to put on the table. It looks like as if these golden rules are there by nature, but they are not. They are not. And that is because not everybody shares the same knowledge about these kind of things. So one of the things we would like to do is sharing knowledge, bring knowledge together, share knowledge, and see to it that we are not going to end in the low unconventional case, either by over-regulation or by non-regulation. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yes. A follow-up on that question.
Name and affiliation.
You said discussing with companies and technical people in these companies that they don't know what they're doing. How do you know that they don't know what they're doing?
No, I think you misinterpret my words. But if a company, whoever it is not prepared to be transparent about what they are doing, then the question will be, do they know what they are doing? That's the point. And that's exactly the reason why there were these bans in a number of countries. You don't want them. I think so. I think you would like to have a revolution in gas, in shale gas, in the United States and somewhere else in this world as well, because it will improve energy security. And that's my point. Companies have to realize that they need to be transparent about what they are doing. And they need to take people's concerns seriously. And that means if anything happens, whether it's a spill in a pipeline or something else, they have to act immediately, and they have to act in the proper way. That's just another example. Because otherwise, there will be problems. And we don't want these problems. And that's why I'm emphasizing this. So coming back to your question, if somebody, when we ask something, or when a government asks something, or when the press asks something, and you just get an answer, oh, you can be reassured, if everything will be okay, people don't believe you. That's my point. You have to be transparent about this. You have to take them seriously.
Try it, you like it.
Yes. Roger, any with Deloitte. Question for you. Given your support of open markets and free trade, and in the U.S., of course, we have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is expected to, help, buffer any supply disruptions in the United States for physical quantities of oil. What's your position in regards to release of oil from that reserve for market manipulation or market adjustments because of shortages that might otherwise occur versus, natural disasters or otherwise?
Well, you mentioned something very interesting, and that is what these strategic petroleum reserves are for. They are there to bridge the implications, the impact of a serious disruption of supply. That's what they're for. But of course, the strategic reserves in any country, there's a limit. The limit is 90 days of import. 90 days of import. So 90 days of import, that's the level that any country, IEA member should have. And whether they have it in strategic reserves owned by the government or industrial reserves or by tickets, they can do it in several ways. So, of course, we are always monitoring a situation, how it is developing, and whether there is a real disruption of supply, and whether, when there's no disruption of supply, there's no reason for the IEA to be involved. And the seriousness of the disruption of supply was, for instance, last year when we had the Libya problem, where the Libyan problem caused to get quite a lot of oil not being brought to the market, and that's why the collective action was done then for 1 month, and about 2 million barrels a day, and that was it. Just 1 month and 2 million barrels a day to bridge that situation, and also to bridge the third quarter in which we expected quite a lot of extra demand in crude. But the situation, of course, now is different. We can see prices. Prices are, as you mentioned before, it's open market. It comes down to market fundamentals, and market fundamentals are the basis of our system, and I think we have to have it in mind. But of course, we are always monitoring the market and see what's happening. Of course, we have to do that. But it does not mean that that you are changing the market fundamentals, because when you look at the price of the key oil benchmark crudes, they are at the heart of pricing system. And they are used by oil companies and traders to price cargoes. They are used in spot market transactions. They are used by future exchanges for settlement of their financial contracts. They're used by bank and companies. They're used by governments for tax purposes and so on. And I think it's important that you always look at the market, see what's happening, see where maintenance is going on, for instance, see where outages are. And the strategic stocks, well, they are there for strategic use.
Yes.
Alan Livingston, independent producer. 2 questions. One is, how has the European economic problems affected the development of renewable energy in some of the countries? And the second question, is Gazprom playing a major role in hindering development of unconventional gas in parts of Europe?
These are very nice questions, especially the last one. Me coming from Europe, you know. But let's start with the development of renewables. What we can see at this moment, that is that renewables are coming of age, but not everywhere and not all of them. For instance, well, hydro is very important in a number of countries. For instance, in Norway, let's stick to Europe for the moment. When it comes to wind, it's quite important to Germany and to others, but we've also seen some failures because of over-subsidy. And that we have seen the problem in Spain, for instance, where a lot of money was given to installed capacity. So not to produce, but to install capacity. And then you can see that you have a lot of capacity with less production or no production, because there's this very simple fact that if you produce, it's got to go somewhere. And that brings us to the problem of the grids. And for instance, there is no real grid connection between Spain and France. So then you have your installed capacity, but it doesn't work. On the other hand, where you can see a more prudent approach to renewables, it's developing. Well, what we like to see is that renewables are going to develop into a real market. But that's not the case everywhere, and it's not the case at this moment. But we are watching that. We are bringing together best practices. This year we produced for the first time our midterm market on renewables, which has best practices on where some of the renewables are already really mature. For instance, offshore wind, wind in Brazil, onshore wind in China. Onshore wind in some parts of Europe, but not everywhere, solar in some parts, hydro in some parts. These are just some examples. But we can also see that if you have a feed-in tariff, and that's my last remark on that, if you have a feed-in tariff, actually the subsidy on producing, you have to see to it that the feed-in tariffs is variable, is flexible. Because if it's not flexible, if it's not capped, for instance, well, then you are over-subsidizing and you are going the wrong way. So I think it's quite an interesting thing to see what is going on. What we can see, that is, where there has been a prudent policy on renewables, also with feed-in tariffs or tax credits or whatever they use, that it brought jobs. It brought many jobs, and these jobs are there to stay. So it is a future market. It has to be developed. I think it's important because of our climate and our CO2 emissions, but also because of energy security. And given the situation in Europe, well, it's a little bit crunched between, and that brings me to Russia, between the Russian bear and the American hawk, for whatever you call it. Eagle. Okay, the eagle. You're right, the eagle. So Europe has to define its own policy. That brings me to Gazprom. What we can see at this moment in Europe, that there is a certain dependence on Russian gas coming to Europe through Nord Stream, for instance. And well, what is important, that there is still some gas in Europe, some gas resources. In the Netherlands we have them, and we have gas resources in Norway. These are the two big ones. But of course there are shale gas resources in Poland, for instance. Why do you think that they are so interested in developing these unconventional gas resources?
Russia.
Well, you give the answer. On the other hand, Gazprom knows. So sometimes you read in the press about their concerns, about the Russian concerns of the implications of development of unconventional gas in Poland. So you always have to look through it. The Russians know, Gazprom knows, that they have to diversify their markets. It's not only about Europe, because Europe is looking for diversification as well. So that means and we can see this already, they are looking eastwards, they are looking to China, they are building their pipelines to China, they are diversifying their markets as well. And I think it's important for Europe to see to it that you are not dependent on one supplier. And that's exactly the reason why, when I was minister in the Netherlands, I wanted this gas hub in the northwest region of Europe to be developed, because we have a lot of depleted gas fields. We have, I think, a lot of geographical assets, having Rotterdam, having Eemshaven. In Rotterdam now LNG terminals are being built. It's a gateway to Europe. The other gateway to Europe is Baumgarten in Austria. So I think it's very important for Europe, the European Union, to develop a policy on energy together, and not country by country, because that's the only way in which you really can, well, tackle Gazprom issues. It's a long answer, but I hope there were very interesting questions, challenging ones.
David Savage with NALCO. Back on the public perception issues, it's really around contamination of water, and then obviously the fracking process is a very water-intensive process. And do you see that as a limiting factor, for example, in China, where their resources are not in proximity to the water that would be required to produce them? And if you could speak.
The answer is yes, and that's exactly the reason, I think, why China is so interested in what's going on in Eagle Ford. Because what they are doing there now is developing. They have a project going on how to use the used water, how to see to it that it is cleaned up again, so that you reuse it. And I think these mechanisms of reusing processed water, because that's what we are talking about, are of interest to those countries who have these problems in water supply. And on the other hand, I think it's also very useful for public perception and to convince the public that we are really doing something about the water. It's about the aquifers, but it's also about what are you doing with the used water. How are you organizing a more or less closed circuit? And I think the experiments and the projects the project that is being under its way here in Eagle Ford is really very important to bring this kind of evidence to the public and to governments and to other companies.
I'm Nancy Sauer, and I'm an independent government relations consultant, and I also teach over at the business school across the courtyard. I have two questions. One is, here in the United States, we've developed Frac Focus, which you've probably run into, Frac Focus, which is a website designed to educate the public about the chemicals used downhole. And that was an attempt by industry to respond to concerns that there was a toxic mix of chemicals that would leach into the groundwater and cause problems for landowners and the general public. My question is, where is Europe on developing something similar to address public concerns? And then I have a follow-up.
Not far. Not far. At this moment, we can see in Europe that, for instance, in a country like Poland, there are no real public concerns, but that has other reasons, as we just discussed. In France, there is a very, very strong opposition against fracking and against unconventional. Well, you can see the banners when you drive, for instance, between Paris and then you go in the direction of Champagne. Then you can find everywhere. You can see the banners alongside the street. No, and then what they are against when it's always about fracking. So there's a world to gain here. I really do hope that our work in this group on golden rules of gas will also cover this issue. And of course, it's up to governments and industry what they would like to bring into it. But I think it would be very interesting to bring the US experience in this matter also within that group. So, and I know there are some people here around that are now making a note of that.
Well, and my follow-up is, we enjoy here in the United States a mineral law at the state level that allows individual property owners to receive substantial benefits from drilling on their property. And so my question would be, in Europe, without those similar types of laws, how can you engage local individuals to get excited about fracking in a way that may seem foreign to us?
There's one big difference between the United States and other parts of the world, and it is who owns the property. And here, the person who owns the property doesn't only own the surface, but also the resources. And that's a very big difference. This also gives, and then I come back to your question, this also gives a very strong position to the property owner. When I was at Eagleford, we discussed the contract between Shell and the property owner. And they explained to me that there were quite some safety valves, let me put it like that, in it that had to do with wildlife, it had to do with the fracking, the cleaning up, where the roads were supposed to be, and etc., etc. I asked them, and they told me, well, it's quite a tight contract. And so I asked them, well, who assisted them? Who assisted the property owner to make the contract as it is now? And then he said, well, the Shell lawyers did. And why do I mention it? Because it shows that there is a concern on the industrial side about how a contract should look like. Because at the end, it's not the property owner who is blamed. It's the company who's blamed. And I think that's something that we have to bear in mind. Then coming back to how to engage local communities. Well, when I was in Canada this week, I was in Fort McMurray, and there they have the oil sands, and well, also quite a number of ecological and other questions raised by the local community. What we can see there, that is that the companies engaged with local community. They were transparent about what they are doing, but they also were, well, how shall I put it? They took their concerns seriously. For instance, concerns about roads, about congestion, how to solve that. This, I think, is one of the things that could be quite helpful. Then to Europe, what we can see there, of course, there's opposition. There's always opposition. Well, we had the opposition because the people in the Netherlands, they didn't want a CCS, no. They didn't want to have the large transportation grids. Well, that was a problem because then you could see them. Well, and then you have these big windmills, you could hear them. And if they were offshore, well, then they are on your horizon. So there were always some problems. But a number of problems you have to take seriously. One of the things, if you engage them in, where are For instance, these windmills, let's stick to that. Where are they placed? How will be the trajectory of a pipeline? Where will the fracking be? How will the questions of the water be answered and be transparent about it? And if there are some revenues, if there are some benefits you could share, do it, because it's helpful. And that's what we are working on in Europe as well at this moment. It differs. For instance, in France, it's no. In Poland, it's okay. In the Netherlands, it's, well, what's in it for me? And, and in Germany, it's all of it a little bit.
The other man's problem.
Sorry?
In Germany, it's the other guy's problem.
Well, I would like to yes and no. It's a no because it's their problem as well, and sometimes it's yes, it's the other guy's problem. For instance, they have huge offshore wind farms and onshore wind farms in the north, but they need the power produced there in the south. But wait a minute, but their own transportation grid is not actually state of 2012. So they use the grids of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and on the other side of Poland, Czech Republic. So
in northern Westphalia, my wife is from Munster.
Yeah.
There's a windmill every 50 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No one objects. They objected when people spent tens of billions of euros, however, to put up solar panels in a country that has no sun.
Well, it's not as bad as that, you know. No, it's not as bad as that. No, you are exaggerating. You are exaggerating. And at this moment, what we can see with this new panels and the new technologies, with films and with paint, it really brings more. But I do agree. If you really want, and coming back to your question about renewables, if you really want to have to be the renewables to be a success, you have to have a look at what your own resources are. And if geothermal is there, use geothermal. If it's hydro, use hydro. If it's solar, if it's the sun, it's the wind, use it. If it's a biomass, for instance, use it. And see to it that you have no conflict with food.
Hi. Yes, my name is Jim McGill. I'm a reporter with Platts, and I wanted to get back to the subject of the strategic petroleum reserves. Has the IEA been in contact with the Obama administration about plans to release reserves from the strategic petroleum reserves?
No. Why should we? There's no reason for that. As I mentioned before, there is not a serious disruption of supply, so there's no reason for that. But of course, we have 28 members, and we have 4 times a year there's a board meeting where all the members are there, and there are always contacts, of course, because you need to know. And we are always monitoring the market and see what's happening, where the outages are, where the problems are, where the maintenance is being done. For instance, now in some parts of the Buzzard field in the UK, it will be maintained. There will be maintenance in September. Of course, we know about that, but that's just business as usual.
We have time for one last question.
Tim Mock, Houston Climate Protection Alliance. I actually have 2, if I can squeeze them in. I'll ask the first one. Concerning the golden rules, there is a general perception that natural gas is better for the climate than coal. But when looked at carefully, because of methane leakage, there seems to be a controversy, and it's almost a wash. Certainly the transition could be justified based on reducing air toxics like mercury and sulfur. But I'm wondering to what extent and how fast the golden rules will come on to where it is clear that it's beneficial to the climate to go to natural gas.
Okay. Well, the first thing is that we consider gas better for the climate in the medium term, because the idea is that it will replace coal. That's in the medium term. And then it will act as a bridge to a cleaner energy supply. At the same time, we know, because of the growing population in the world, we are growing towards 9 billion people in a couple of decades. And the growth in in prosperity, the economic growth in countries like China, India, a number of other Asian countries, there will be a huge demand for energy, a huge demand for energy. So we are not foreseeing a world without fossil fuels. And then the question is, well, what kind of fossil fuel would you prefer? And then coal, I'm sorry to say so, is at the bottom of the line. So that's my first answer to you. When it will be, there are a number of uncertainties, of course, there. It's the geopolitical situation, the economic growth in the number of countries, the growth space in the countries where I was just talking about. And of course, then that brings me to the golden rules. Because if we are not going to be able to produce this unconventional gas that's widespread all over the world, so the geopolitical tensions to go with it are much and much less than with oil. So it's important to see to it that we get a kind of social license to operate, to see to it that we are going to explore this unconventional gas. When will it be? That depends from country to country, let's be honest. Because it's all about regulation, it's about the cooperation between industry and government and research and development, so universities, to see to it that we are enhancing, bringing forward the technology, because that's one thing, because technology brings answers. I'm really a fervent advocate on that. Technology brings answers. And the second thing is that we have the right regulation that really promotes technology and new solutions for these kind of problems. And then we expect that by 2035 it must be possible to have this in place. But there are a number of assumptions, as I just mentioned a few.
And my second question has to do with the almost universal assumption that 2 degrees Celsius is the maximum safe planetary heating. Of course, we're already seeing at less than half of that. Mm-hmm. Significant damage here to U.S. forests and farms. In order to stay below that 2 degrees, there's only a limited amount of carbon we can put into the atmosphere. Already, fossil fuel companies have 5 times that amount of carbon in proven reserves. And I'm not sure what the rational basis is for continuing to develop more carbon sources when we can't use them and keep a safe planet.
Well, maybe I would like to take a slightly different approach. The 2 degrees Celsius, it's one of our scenarios in the energy technology perspective, is actually the scenario we would like to see, because that would really bring us to where we want to be. And to get there, it's absolutely necessary to use all technology we have and to see to it that technology that is not yet mature is going to be matured. For instance, when we are talking about renewables, and also when we are talking about biomass. And that's another very, very, I think, interesting discussion, but it would take an hour or more to go. But it's part of the problem and it's part of the solution. On the other hand, what we can see in the fossil fuel, the energy-related infrastructure at this moment, if we are not doing anything before 2017, all the energy-related CO2 emissions in 2035 will be eaten up. And that's what we call our lock-in scenario. I think you're referring to that. So that means that it's really a need to be active. And, well, when you look into what's happening, CCS is one of the solutions. The other solution is more renewables and do it in a more effective way. And the third solution is getting a transition from coal to gas. And then, of course, the most important thing, that is the political will. The political will and the industrial competence to work together.
Everybody join me in thanking you.